All right, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to just make sure the feed is going through on my end, and we'll have people get logged in. And it may take, if you're watching this live, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. That's always helpful. And for those that are watching a replay, you may want to just fast forward to about 8 or 10 minutes. I'll just do a quick audio test on my monitor feed. Okay, that seems to be going okay. How this works, this is our May 1st, 2020 Google Club Cubase Google Hangout. And how this works is we have people will ask questions in the comments field, and we'll go through and answer those questions. We have also had people that had emailed questions in advance. And you can do that to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And especially if it's a little more involved, and I could have some materials prepared in advance. And then we'll kind of get through as many questions as we can, hopefully in order as people ask them. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. That'd be great, so we can see where everyone is from. We're going to let people get logged in, and we'll wait just a couple minutes. My name is Greg Undo. I'm presenting from Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside D.C. in the United States. I work as a product specialist for Steinberg in the United States, and one thing is in the comments field, if you have your questions, often entering it in. We've had some hangouts where people enter the same question in like 30 or 40 times. It won't help your question get answered faster. It just kind of clogs up the feed for everyone. So we'll try to get through as many questions as completely and as succinctly as possible. So so doing that just kind of makes it a little more pleasant experience for everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started here again in a few minutes. People are getting logged in. So we'll try to go for about 3 hours. We'll also try to have all the questions and topics of the Hangout indexed maybe late tonight, so that you could navigate pretty quickly to find different questions and stuff like that. So let's go see. I see Alo on the Hangout again. He's been kind of a regular attendee. Good to see you. Sir Robert from Atlanta. All right, so Robbie from Dallas. Good to see you. All right, so we have Connecticut, Dominican Republic. Okay, we have Millard from Pennsylvania, another regular attendee. I'm sorry, I just sprayed some WD-40 on my little desktop mic stand, so it was squeaking a bit in the last Hangout, so I'll have to save up and get a headset mic so I can move around freely. Okay. Okay, so we have Ambient Dave. That's good. Okay, Saudi Arabia. All right, so we have Toronto, Kurdistan, Sweden, Norway. Okay, Tampa. Okay, so just seeing question on MIDI guitar notes. All right, so we have Taylor from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Always look forward to seeing Taylor just because I have my family from near Pine Grove, so it brings a warm feeling to me every time I see Taylor in a Hangout, just geographically. All right, so we have Bulgaria. Okay, so we have UK. All right, Stockholm. Dubai. All right, US, India, London. So I see a question, and like many of you that are kind of in our home quarantine mode, my wife is working upstairs, so you may hear, her conference calls that she's involved with, and my son is at home, and there's a question is if it was Legos or films today. So it's right now he's on a film. It'll probably migrate to Legos, and if he picks up all of his Legos, we'll get to record a song in his studio after the hangout. Okay. So thanks for asking. So inevitably my son, during the 3 hour hangout will need a movie reset or something. So I'll apologize in advance for that, but I'm sure most people with kids at home at this time can relate. Okay, so we're seeing from New York, some automation questions. St. Louis, Austin. Love going to Austin. All right, so we have Austria, city I've always wanted to go to, or country. I always wanted to go to Vienna as a classical music fan. Mission Viejo, Brooklyn, Norway, Beverly Hills. Okay, so we still have people getting logged in. We'll give it a couple more minutes. All right, just seeing some people thanking me for doing the webinars and hangouts. So we're trying to do these while people are stuck at home. I usually was always the guy that traveled. I think, did 120 flights or something last year. So obviously my travel has been curtailed. So that's why we're trying to do a lot of these events instead of flying around doing in person, that we could do these live for people online and people could watch it afterwards. So this hangout will be streamed afterwards. All right, so we have Westminster, Maryland, not too far from me. Uganda, India. All right, London. Okay. Okay, so just wait another minute or two and get started. Okay, so we see Portugal. All right, so we have Hampshire. I guess it's maybe, if it's in the UK, it's probably the old Hampshire as opposed to the New Hampshire we have in the United States. Okay, so wait just another minute. We have more people getting logged in. Thanks. It's a thrill to see people throughout the whole world kind of participating in the Hangouts. It's always interesting. I think we had our first attendee from Cuba that I've noticed live. So that was fun. We usually get about 5 continents. So it's always interesting. I don't think we've had a person from Antarctica yet. So, but we could always hope. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So it says, first question, hey Greg, hope you're doing well. In Cubase 10.5, how can I export individual tracks after I have them mixed down to create stems? So if I have this particular project here, and this will be, audio, MIDI, and a number of different sources all together, and I wanted to create stems that I could pass on maybe to someone who wasn't as smart enough yet to be running Cubase, or they're running another program and needed to kind of collaborate with them a bit more intelligently. So when you go to your file and choose Export Audio Mixdown, at this point, it'll default probably to single. And this is, I think, only in the Cubase Pro level. And here we could see my output channel. So if it was single, and if I wanted to do like a stereo mix down of all of my different sources, I would do that. and that would take all of my audio, MIDI, virtual instruments, virtual effects, the automation, and bounce it down to a stereo file that we would name in this field. If I wanted to make actual stem files, which would be audio files that would be basically equal length audio files that would all start and end at the same time, so that nearly anyone could put it into another program and hit play. That's when we would click on the multiple tab here. So now I could say I wanted my stereo output, I wanted my group channels, I wanted my effects channels rendered independently, I wanted my instrument tracks and all my VST instrument channels, all of my audio channels. And what this would do, once I do this, when we could have this automatically create a new project we have the after export options, so we could choose create new project here, or insert all the stems into a particular folder. So we could, if we wanted to put it, we'll see the file names will automatically be carried over from here, and we could just at this point choose a different folder in the file path, and that will make equal length audio files that will be kind of stemmed out. Now, one thing that people run into, and I get this question a lot, is like, oh, everything that I exported was stereo, but maybe I wanted my vocal, which is a mono source, a mono track, or my bass to be exported as a mono source. So really, to do that, it kind of depends on the output of the mixer configuration. So if I wanted to have both mono and stereo together, I could go to my audio connections, and in my outputs, I could create just another bus, and I'm just going to create a mono bus. And when I create a mono bus, I could take my mono tracks I wanted, such as my vocal, and now I will just quickly come over here and just, when I'm doing my export, just choose it to a mono out. And that way the tracks that are mono route to the mono output. And at that point, you could just simply do a bounce, do the file export audio mix down. And when in multiple, your tracks that are routed to the mono output will automatically be rendered as mono, and your other tracks could be rendered as stereo. So that's how you could make stems quite easily. Next question. Can you please tell us something about automation in general? What is the difference between CC automation versus host automation? What do you prefer? For example, UVI Falcon can only handle host automation. So a lot of times when we're dealing with MIDI sources, let's say if I want to go to this particular MIDI track and we double click, and if I wanted volume to occur, we could use MIDI messages. So if it's routed to a virtual instrument track, we could have we have control over the audio characteristics of that as well. So if I wanted to come here, I could draw in very easily. I could just say, okay, let's just select a draw tool, and I want it to be, which is default to the line tool. So if I want this to get softer, I could just have this be a MIDI continuous controller. So this would kind of speak directly to our MIDI messages, and that would take the MIDI volume or MIDI panning or the modulation. So let's say if I wanted to come here and it was an organ patch, and I wanted to simulate kind of the Leslie effect kicking in here with modulation, we could have these MIDI continuous controllers automatically within the MIDI part itself. So as soon as I come here, all of my controllers and my MIDI CCs will work. So a lot of composers will, add different levels of expression using MIDI expression, continuous controller, or MIDI volume, and modulation. Those are very key things. So those could actually be part of the MIDI track. Now, sometimes you may want to have the traditional automation here as well. So this automation that we have below a track, even though it kind of looks the same, is not MIDI data. This is automation that when we look at our mix console will cause our If we look at our vocal here, we can see that as I move to different spots, that this fader will automatically update based on the location that I'm in. So this automation is moving the particular fader. Now, there's some handy things that we see within some of the automation handling. So if you do, some really, nice automation handling functions that may not be carried over into the MIDI stuff yet, is the ability to come over here and do like a Bezier curve. So if I wanted to take a particular point of my automation here within the automation, we could now just kind of have these curves. So if I wanted to do this within traditional automation, I can now select that. And if that was like a filter sweep or something for synth, I could just, duplicate that if I wanted to. So those types of curves currently aren't available in like the MIDI CC editor. So if you just kind of draw that in. So some people will want this type of automation instead in lieu of this, feeling that this is a bit more advanced and sophisticated with drawing tools, and this could be kind of hasn't really changed in many years for MIDI. So if you wanted to have this level of control for your MIDI CCs, what you could do is when you go to your MIDI track, there's also a CC automation setup. So you could determine which, if you wanted volume to always be an automation track, you could do that. But if you wanted modulation to always be on the MIDI part, you could choose different ways of working. I think, I've seen there might be some confluence of technologies where we could maybe have this type of editing directly within the MIDI CC lane. So we may see that coming. I could speculate in the future. But those are some of the differences why. So you could have some more advanced control when it's dealing with as an automation, and sometimes it could be a little easier for copying different data from one automation track to another with the automation as opposed to MIDI CC. So I know it's a little convoluted, but if you wanted to do lots of curves for MIDI CCs, the automation is probably a better setup for you. Some people like to have it very distinct because that's how they've always worked. Like a lot of composers will be, very much set up that way to work with the MIDI CCs because they can see it all within the track as well. Okay, so follow-up question from Alo. Also, on the export waves, should I export to 24-bit if they're going to be used for a game? It really can depend. So a lot of times games don't even play back 16-bit audio files. It's whatever the client asks for. Ideally, in a real world, you'd want to give them maybe a 32-bit floating point. And games are usually run at 48K sample rates. Sometimes they may just ask for 16-bit 44.1. So it really depends on what the client is asking for. And always, if you're doing files for someone else, just ask what the delivery specification is, because different game systems, and a lot of game systems will, do like, an amazing amount of batch processing to convert the audio file so that they'll play back depending on the interactivity of the player. So if the player actually moves this way, could change this music to that. And just like in video, the audio is kind of the redheaded stepchild in a lot of regards, and they don't get a lot of bandwidth and for data as opposed to the visuals. So a lot of times the game engines will do a lot of compression of your audio file. So just check with, whatever your game company is using, and it could probably give you an indication of the delivery format, and just stick to that. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to change multiple track icons at once? So if you're not familiar with the track icons, we'll see these little pictures often on tracks. And what you could do is you can say, you know, this is our lead vocal, and you get these pretty pictures of, you know, different instruments that you could use. So let's say, okay, this is going to be our lead vocal, and, you know, mysteriously, most of them look like Yamaha instruments. But I don't think that we could set this for, and incidentally, you could also use your own user pictures. So I know a lot of people will take like a picture of the guitar amp and be able to have that guitar amp actually there and use that as a reference. But I don't think we could do multiple track icons. So let me just see. Yeah, so I don't know a way of doing or copying multiple track icons. So I think it's kind of doing it on a track by track basis. Okay, just moving over. Okay, it says, "Hi, Greg. Greetings from Dominican Republic. It's good to have someone from Dominican Republic on a hangout. Thank you. I want to know why Media Bay is empty in my Cubase 9.5 and where to find it, because I think I moved the folder." So when you come over here to your Media Bay, you know, a lot of times you could just see, you know, your Media Bay tag information, all your different loops here. And that will kind of go with the default install location. And if you open up the big media bay, which you could access by hitting F5, you can see there's a column on the left. And just in case you don't see that column on the left, just simply click on this icon here, and then that column on it will appear on the left. And you'll see like a VST sound that will be incorporated here. So what you need to do is you could just kind of click on the folders here. Now you could also go directly to your computer. So if you moved files to a particular folder, and at this point, you know, you could go to where the files were moved and right click and just choose to rescan disk. So you could choose like very specific folders here. And there is a utility. Let me just take a look. Called the Steinberg Library Manager. And these will often be for like third party. So I think if you come over here within you'll see Cubase, Nuendo, and these are some of the different expansion packs that are available. So you could move these directly, you know, from the library manager. So as soon as you go directly here, you know, you could choose your library manager or just kind of click on details and you could see kind of the path of where that is. And then once you do that, it may take like a little bit of time for the media bay to kind of find all the different files, like all your content, depending on how many loops and stuff like that you have. But, you know, that's where you could, you know, within the library manager, which is installed with Cubase, you could also move contents there and have it searched for and set the default folders as we see. Okay, just moving on. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay. So we have a question. Is there a way to create extra folders outside the audio folder when creating a new project using a template? So it looks like maybe like when we do a new project, And I'll just start from maybe a template. Okay, so I'm going to have it automatically kind of prompt me for, project locations. And let's say if I want to now record, an audio track, and if I'm reading this right, a way to create extra folders outside the audio folders when creating a new project. So if you wanted the audio files to go into a separate folder, by default, it will go into, when you do a new project, you could have it prompt for the project location. This is what I choose. The default setting is this, where it'll kind of put it into your documents folder. But I like to have each project in its own folder. So and I have this set up a lot for live stuff, where maybe, I'm doing a live recording and someone will immediately want to take a hard drive back with them. So at this point, I'll just start brand new. I'll just do a new empty project, and I'll show you a trick. And this really saved me. I did a huge Eric Clapton festival once, and the video guys wanted their hard drive 10 seconds after the show instead of copying it. So let's say if I have, I'll do 8 tracks here. And then if I wanted to have the record destination go to different folders, I'm just going to put these into a folder. And now I will choose to duplicate this folder. So let's say this will be backup. And I have all of these going directly to my project and to the audio folder within that. But if I wanted my backup files to be recorded to a different folder, all I'd have to do is open them up, and then you could select the particular files. And then you could choose to set record folder when you right click, and you could place this into a separate folder. So this way, if you wanted to record to 2 separate drives simultaneously for a live thing, or put audio files into a separate folder for a client that's independent of the project, you could just simply direct it to its own independent record file folder. So again, just select the tracks, and you can do that for multiple files simultaneously, and then click on the set record folder, and that will give you an extra folder outside of the audio folder when you're creating the new project, even starting from a template. Okay, so see question. Hope you and your family are well. So yeah, we're doing great. We're just staying in and being boring. So cleaning messy MIDI guitar notes when using MIDI electric guitar via triple play connected to record live. I find 80% of the MIDI notes are doubled. Also left over are specs and scraps of MIDI notes, about a few ticks in length around my melodies. No consequences for sound, then need erasing. Do you know any delete shortcuts or a macro that can speed up my workflow? So let's one of the functions, and this is kind of an old one from Cubase, when people would have controllers that would kind of do create similar problems. So if you have a bunch of MIDI notes that are doubled or kind of falsely triggered, if you go to the functions key, and I'll just add a MIDI track. I'll just do an instrument track here real quick. All right, there's my brilliant composition. All right. So once I have this, if you go to the MIDI, you could just say under functions, there is a delete doubles function. So, and that will look for notes that are kind of maybe, within the same part, that are sometimes maybe on different MIDI layers or MIDI channels. So try just the delete. Just simply coming here and doing a delete doubles. Now you could also, let's say if we have a bunch of very, very short notes. So let me just set my draw a couple in. I think we could use maybe a logical editor preset. Just take my snap off here. So let's say if I wanted to do this, we could probably go to your MIDI to logical editor. And let's set up a condition. So let's say I wanted to delete, and we'll say MIDI notes, and we'll say whose length is less than, we can say 1/16th note, or we could just kind of say that. So, and now I could just say, let's apply. So those are probably 16th notes there, but let's see if I can. I'll just copy this note a couple times. Okay, so if we have this selected, so I can say, let's go ahead and all right. So, so I think if you experiment with, let's try this. So say if it's less than the 16th note, so you could set kind of like your clock pulses. And then I think if you kind of play around with the logical editor, there may be some presets. Let me just see if there's, sorry for my squeaky mic stand. So, try playing around with the logical editor. I think basically you could choose it to delete notes. I may not even need this particular setting with lengths lower than 1/16th note. So I probably have something just wrong, but I think if you experiment with that you could get what you want. But try, for probably the most pressing thing is just going to be the delete doubles. Just go to your MIDI functions and choose delete doubles there. Okay, moving on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Okay, so we have a question. How do you create user impulses for reverence? So there's all sorts of different schools of thought on how to create a convolution reverb. I know some people, will send an impulse signal into a room and record that and take off the initial attack. So if you're not familiar with what a convolution reverb is, and these can make a big difference overall. especially you're doing, if you're trying to simulate a actual space very effectively. So I will, let's just add an effects channel track. So, and what this is based on is actual, it's basically sampling a particular room. So when we come over here, we can say, okay, they've gone in and sampled a Dutch concert hall. So instead of simulating that through different algorithmic processes, they actually just come over here and load up a audio file that's the basis for the room. So what I've seen some people do is actually go in and pop a balloon and then take out the initial pop, and that's a very kind of short transient, and then take out the initial attack, and then whatever sound that the room generates will be recorded. I know I have friends that do stuff for like a big ministry in Dallas, and when the minister goes to different, he's on TV all the time, very famous. But when they go to different venues for a traveling show, and they want the room to be consistent, they will always do a quick impulse response. Some people will just clap or hit like a piece of wood, something with a very short ambience, and kind of just take that off. And once you have that as a WAV file, all you have to do is choose to import any standard WAV file. So, and if you look online, there's lots of different impulses that are available that people do, and it also carries over, especially to like trying to make a guitar cabinet that's very realistic. So, so there's a lot of people that have collected just different impulse responses. So, but balloon pop is kind of a classic way. Some people will slap, two pieces of wood. Some people will shoot a gun. Just an air gun, just to kind of get that initial very short attack and to get the sound of the room, and then you just import it as a WAV file into Reverence. All right, so move on. So seeing Jan from Stockholm, good to see you on. Okay. Okay, so hey Greg, can you show us how to start up the VST Connect Pro, please? So this is a kind of a great product, and it's actually, I believe, still on sale for 50% off. So if you go to your VST Cloud, you get VST Connect SE that comes with the program, and VST Connect Pro, which is sold separately. And the big difference is VST Connect SE allows you to do 2 tracks at once. VST Connect Pro, you can do up to 16 tracks. So we'll come over here and do our VST Connect. So I will, as we do this, I'll just kind of, it says create VST Connect, and I will just have an input defined. I'll just come over here, and this will prompt me for talkback microphone. It's going to load up the program and then automatically add a track, and it's created in our control room its own output for a QMix. You will use your My Steinberg account, log in, and this is always tricky to show while doing a Hangout. You could find different friends if you wanted to, so you could search for users, find them. And at this point, they would have a free program called VST Connect Performer. So they don't have to be running Cubase, but it'd be helpful if they have an audio interface and a microphone and headphones, like a basic setup to get started. And you find the person, they create a My Steinberg account, and you could actually see them directly on the webcam. And, it's really just a matter of, once you've established your connection with them, of just hitting record. You will send a Q mix out, so you may have to make a headphone mix in Cubase. That will be sent out to the performer. There'll be a little bit of a delay for that to happen, and it's always best to use a wired connection, because the fluctuating speeds of Wi-Fi aren't very good for this type of scenario. So stay on a very stable wired connection. And at that point, the music gets broadcast to the performer. They hear it all in sync with their own performance. And then it's recorded directly back into your signal, directly into the track so you can edit. So that's kind of the basics of how you get started. Now, VST Connect is a peer-to-peer connection, so it's not going to be intended where, our band can't rehearse and we need to have 6 people all jam remotely at home. So it's not designed for that, and I really haven't seen anything that works consistently for that that's just software-based. So it's not doing that. So it's not going to come off like the pre-recorded live streams that we often see recently. But it will, I know like so many people are doing stuff now with it, and it's just worked out fabulously while they're doing physical distancing. So that's a quick run through and how you get up and running with VST Connect. Okay, question. What would you use? Recommend using the different compressor plugins for? Are there any specific uses, or would you say is a no-brainer? It really can depend. There are different flavors. So you could have a Coke, Pepsi, or RC colas. And they're different flavors depending on what you're going for. So I'll just go ahead and close this project quickly. So as you have, particular tracks, we can, so I'll just add a couple audio tracks here. And we could do this within the channel strip or running it as plugin. So you're gonna have a standard compressor, and sometimes you get more of a sense of what's going on. So you could see this visually, that as the signal hits this threshold, that it'll start to compress, and how much it compresses, you could see visually. So that's kind of, and all the compressors are really good. So, if you feel the need to really, go to other, compressors, really kind of experiment with these. You have a tube compressor, which is going to, give you the sound of classic tube compression. So give you that bit of grit that people often look for. And some of the things that make this, like the tube and the vintage compressor, unique is the mix parameter here. And it was kind of interesting when we introduced this new range of compression, a tube compression and the vintage compressor. I have a friend, it's kind of, I call him my golden ear buddy. And people like near where I live, in the DC area, anyone who does audio knows of Greg Lukens, and he probably has he has the most ridiculous ears of all time. And he's actually a blind mastering engineer, but probably the smartest person anyone will ever meet in their life. And he loves the fact, one, that both the vintage and the tube compressors have a mix parameter on it. So you can simulate and really get the vibe of the, uncompressed versus fully compressed, and come up with very much like a parallel compression sound, blending those signals in. But he was really shocked at, the quality of these, and was a little, at how much he liked them, and was shocked that we were just including them directly. And so really they're going to be just different flavors of the same principles of controlling dynamics, bringing louder parts down and softer parts up when needed. So no exact rules of thumb. Okay, so we see wondering if you could find the chords to a vocal track. Could you take us through that? So the chord detection that we have is really only set up for doing. It is really set up just for doing MIDI data. So if I wanted to jump to a particular project here. So if I have like maybe like a MIDI part with piano, so there's my, and if I wanted to turn that into and make a chord track based on the piano, what we could do is just go to your project menu and you can see the chord track. And at this point, you could just choose create chord symbols. I generally check the top two and hit OK. And then we could have our chord track. So now when I look at my piano and the score, we could do this. And if I wanted to go to my scores menu, I could just go to the advanced layout and say show chord track, and I could have basically my lead sheet done for me very quickly and effectively. So it doesn't do it for audio. We could have audio generated in harmonies based upon the chord track, but it's not going to do chords based on like, an SATB 4-part harmony recording. And a lot of stuff hasn't kind of proven to be terribly accurate that, does claim to offer that functionality. Okay. All right. So I was seeing, just going through different questions. Okay. So we have a question. In automation, is it possible to time sync, for example, cut off filter to a beat or any other effect like panning? So if you wanted to, if you had automation, one of the things that a lot of people miss in automation is some of the drawing tools that you have. So if you wanted to, have like maybe a filter sweep or something like that that was timed rhythmically. So we have the line tool, but you also have different drawing tools here. So if you want like parabola or sine wave, I could just kind of come here and I could start, and let me just make it a little bigger here. So as I wanted to draw in, and we can see kind of a dark line underneath. So as we do this, I could just kind of draw it in and say, I want that to be on one beat. And if you hold, so now as I drag across, you could have those timed. But if we wanted to change the frequency of that, I could just kind of hold down the shift key and you can see kind of the dark outline. So if I wanted this to be timed, I can now just change the frequency by holding down the shift key. So let's undo and say I wanted this to be. Nope. Just switch to the right tool. Sorry about that. So again, with the shift key, I could just change the musical frequency of those, to match different rhythmic values. So that's how you could time sync automation. You could also do creative things like using LFO, the Auto LFO plugin as well, but that often helps people. Okay. Thanks again for all the great questions. So I see a comment. I think Yamaha ought to get you a headset mic. I probably should lobby for it. It would make my life a little easier. But obviously, our sales aren't quite what they were. Being that we had to close our warehouse for a while. So I'm trying not to be the thorn in the side. But yeah. And seeing a lapel mic, the lapel mics tend not to work so well for this scenario as well. So I want to get like the little Audio Technica headset and mic. I used that once and thought that was really good. So. Okay. Okay, so says, "Hi Greg, I get a spinning beach ball every few minutes. I don't believe it's auto saved and it's not Spotlight." It's from Nick. So just make sure sometimes when it could be check to make sure that you have the latest e-licenser installed. Sometimes maybe certain functions could be calling out to the e-licenser for a quick check, but that could help. And also if it's connected to a hub, try connecting it to a powered hub. But just out of curiosity, try updating your e-licenser, Nick, and I think that might help with that. Okay, question, is there any chance of a Wavelab sale in conjunction with the Stay Home offer? They're currently doing the Stay Home Elements collection, and that will allow you to have the Wavelab elements for free for 60 days. There's kind of scheduled promotions throughout the year. Like we just finished, I think yesterday we just wrapped up our our upgrade promotion, like from Cubase Elements or Cubase Artist to Cubase Pro, that just wrapped up. So there's always kind of evolving promotions that go on. So you may see a Wavelab coming, and but it's not currently going on. But I'll pass that on to the marketing departments. But they probably have something in the works already. Okay, so just saying, I'm waiting for some magnetic mixer channel legends from Bulgaria. So I'm not sure if that's a question on magnetic mixer channels. So I'm not sure, so I'll move on. Okay, so question, hey Greg, when I use MIDI control to set CC7 to 90, how do I record the data to the MIDI part? It sends info to contact, but doesn't write to the actual MIDI part that I can edit after recording. So let's see. I think we might be able to do this with. I'll just give this a shot really quick. And it could be, I'm not sure how it's being written, but I'll just add an instrument track. And I'm going to use the input transformer here. So I'm not sure if that's how you're modifying MIDI or CC7 to 90, but I'll just do a local. And what I want to do, if I set this up, we're going to activate the module. And we're going to choose to transform MIDI controllers. So we'll say type. And we'll say up to controller. And then what we want to do is, let's say, value 1 of the controller, I want to add 89. Okay, so as I record, if I've done this right, when I move my modulation wheel, it's going to add 89 values to value 1. So modulation is controller 1. So, and let's see if it's actually what it records it as. So now moving my mod wheel, we see the MIDI data coming in. And now when we go to double click, show use controllers, and here it's controller 90. So then that becomes editable. So make sure if you're kind of remapping controllers that you're doing it from the input transformer, and you can do this on instrument or MIDI tracks. And it's this little squiggly line here. So make sure that's set to local, and then within the input transformer itself, we want to set the function to transform. We're going to say type is equal to controller. And then we're going to add, like if you wanted MIDI CC7 to go to MIDI CC90, you would move the volume, and then you would say, move a volume slider. So you would say value 1 under operation add, and there you would choose 83. And that way, as you moved a MIDI CC7 message from the controller, it will add 83 to that value and then automatically show it and write it as MIDI 90 on input. So even if we look at that particular part in the list editor, just to verify another way, we could just come over here and we can see that when I moved my modulation wheel, just change that to MIDI CC90. Okay. Okay, just going through questions. Okay, so it says, hello from Slovenia. I have a question. How to bypass all inserts on every track with one click? All right, so I'll just kind of add some inserts here. Okay. And I think if I hold down Alt, okay, so I will just duplicate this track a couple times, and we'll have a few tracks with inserts on it, and I'll change their positions. Okay, so now when we go into our mix console, we'll see our full screen mixer. I'll see lots of inserts populated. So if you come over here, you can see at the very top that you have this insert. So if you wanted to, you could, I think you have to hold down the Alt or Option key, and that would bypass all the inserts in your particular project. So if you click here and it doesn't do anything, just hold down the Alt or Option key, and that will bypass every insert in your project with one mouse click. I think if you wanted to turn them off individually, if you hold down, if you just click here, you could bypass the inserts directly on a channel by channel basis, but hold down the Alt or Option key and you'll see these filter types directly here, and then boom. Okay, so seeing our question about VST Connect Pro, so I think we covered that with the previous question. Okay, sorry, my timeline jumped way ahead. We'll do this a couple times to hang out. Sorry about that. Let me just navigate back. Thanks again for all the questions, and if okay, so it says for scoring film purposes, which is more effective, MIDI tracks or instrument tracks? There really isn't such a huge difference. It could really depend upon the instrument themselves. Like if you're using VE Pro, I think that requires, and I'm not a user of it, so I'm not incredibly familiar with it. But I believe that will, if you host a VE Pro, I think that does it with instrument track or through like an instrument rack, rather. But it could really depend upon the instrument. If you have, I think if you for CPU usage, if you load the same exact thing between instrument tracks and instrument racks, it would be, similar. I don't think it's going to make a big difference. And some people have, predisposed workflows where they start off with instrument tracks and they've just kind of kept that going. You know, or like the instrument racks and sending MIDI data. And if they want to have the MIDI data sent to a hardware synth and a software synth layered, that's where instrument tracks could come in handy. But if you're doing kind of everything in a box, there's not a huge difference between them. But dealing with one multi-timbral instrument can be easier sometimes within an instrument rack. But if you do that, an instrument rack may not spread across all the CPUs. So you may be faster to use instrument tracks if you're kind of optimizing it for multi-core performance. So, but between the two, there's not a huge difference. So you could experiment and see, if you're using VE Pro, probably an instrument rack is better than MIDI tracks. If you're using a lot of outboard MIDI gear or going to, Euro rack stuff, the MIDI tracks will be better for that. So, okay. Okay, so we have a question: when will Nuendo's massive update take place? I haven't heard of an official release date for it, but I know that previously, before the COVID-19 shutdown, that we were going to be, doing a little bit of a preview of it at the Game Developers Conference in March in San Francisco. So that might give you kind of an indication that it's getting pretty close, but I don't know an exact day for that. I know people are anxious for its release to get like colored mixer faders and stuff like that. Okay. All right, so we have a question: is it possible to load a track with quick controls turned on by default? Okay, let's give it a shot. And I'll just try, see if we save it as a preset. I'll try to save a track preset, sorry. Okay. So if I save it as part of a quick control, as a track preset, the quick controls will be enabled. And let's see if I just save this. So the quick controls aren't enabled by default, and I don't know of a preference that would do that, but if you saved it as a track preset, they could be recalled, and of course it's recalled within a particular setup as well, or within a project. But I think that could be a good option, so I'll make sure to mention that. But I don't, if you start from a track preset, but that is probably not any faster than just turning it on. So, but that's a good point. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so it says, can you please tell about creating a mix bus? Is it essential for mixing? It's not essential. I mean, you could definitely do great mixes without a mix bus, but it could definitely simplify things, especially on larger projects. So if I have like maybe like a rock band type project, and I wanted to kind of manage my different tracks so I don't have to take all my drums up or link them. It's convenient to come over here and select those tracks, and you could right click like in the meter area and just say add a group channel to the selected tracks, and I'll make it a stereo group. And now I could just take all my drums and adjust them with one fader. And this is also good for doing, like, I want to take everything and, just do compression on all my drums together as a collective entity. So instead of doing a compressor on every single source, we could just compress the drums. And if I add another, so let's say if I'm really squashing the drums with this compressor, and I wanted to create kind of a parallel path for parallel processing, I could also, I will add we'll just add a group channel here, and again, make it stereo. And I could go to my sends for these tracks. So I will just go ahead and select all these tracks. And go to my sends. I'll hit Alt plus Shift, and we'll send these all to group 2 and turn it on. So now at this point, I could have these going to 2 different buses simultaneously and do like a parallel processing. So I kind of get like an interesting punch from one and dynamics from the other group. And kind of find a sweet balance between those two. And if you have like, I know some producers, like I remember being in Michael Wagner's studio, who's a big like hard rock producer, and sometimes he has 12, mics on a kick drum and 8 mics on a snare. And, that's not uncommon. So, to have a group of your kicks, a group of your snares, a group of your toms, and then those groups feeding a drum group can just kind of simplify the process, but it's not absolutely needed. It's just convenience, and because we have so many groups, why not use it? Okay, question. Please, can you explain how to use MIDI retrospective record in the key editor? So, MIDI retrospective record is kind of a new function. This has been really kind of added within Cubase 10.5. Has had some significant updates. So let's say if I come here, Just load up Chris St. Aubin's instrument. Simple. All right, so let's say, I'm in my key editor, and I've just, so what the retrospective record can do is like you say, oh, I just recorded the greatest thing of all time, and like an idiot, I wasn't in record. I can now just hit the MIDI retrospective record, and my little sequence, my little few notes that I played, were automatically just captured. And we could do this kind of on a track by track basis, or I think we could even do it now with 10.5 within the key editor. So I'll just go to like kind of full screen. So if I come here, at this point you could just bink, and that could go directly into the event, and depending on your MIDI record mode. So let's say if I'm here and I switch my MIDI record mode to merge, while I'm in the key editor, I could just, it's like, oh. And again, just hit the MIDI retrospective record, and you could just have that data right there. So that's kind of the intention. And now with 10.5, you could have up to 10,000 MIDI events. You could have independent MIDI retrospective records directly, on different tracks. So if you had another instrument loaded up, you noodled there, played something great, you had another instrument, noodle again. Each track could have its own, own buffers independent. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. Can or should multiple cues exist in the same project for a film? Looking for suggestions for faster loading of multiple cues. I know a lot of people, I've seen some composers, and true, they have like really kind of monster setups, and they will, and I've seen a few of them. I think Danny Lux is now trying to do multiple cues within a single project, especially if you're kind of working with a template. So, if you're not familiar with this, sometimes, if you have a large orchestral library, it could take a couple minutes to load all the samples up. So if you're working on, a few minutes of music here, and then a few minutes, you need to work 10 minutes on another project, you don't necessarily want to wait 3 minutes to work on something for 10 minutes and then just jump back because of samples that have to get loaded. So it really could depend on how many tracks that you're using. I've seen some people will, have a lot of different tracks open and then disable tracks to free up processing power. So if there's not any data on it to, just to, freeze or disable particular tracks. So it could really depend upon your personal template. If you could do multiple cues in one project. I know some people are trying to do like, at least 2 or 3 particular cues. And we could think of cues as like a particular scene. This is the 1 minute I have to compose music for. And instead of having, if you have 30 of those in a project, instead of having, 30 separate projects to try to do them all consolidated within one project. So it depends on how many tracks you're using. But it's definitely a viable method if you can, if you have the computer to do it. But generally hosting the MIDI data isn't, like the actual MIDI notes aren't the big, CPU killer. It's going to be, just having the instruments and taking the RAM if you're doing like large orchestral libraries. Okay. Okay, so hi, thanks for hosting this question. How do I transport my license from one e-licenser device to my new one that just came in? It's really all you have to do is, I'll just go ahead and open up my e-licenser. is just drag, select your license here and just drag it to the other e-licenser. And then it'll just kind of do its sync. And that's really all you have to do is, you'll get different licenses for each one. Just drag it from your old one to the new one, and that will transfer the license for you. So it's really, pretty Homer Simpson easy, if you will. So, okay, so crazy thing happened the other day. My cursor was not in time with the metronome. It was behind, but my MIDI notes were in time with the metronome, but not visually on the grid, like accidentally. Sometimes when you do that, sometimes like I've seen some people like in the old days would do like a MIDI reset. Constrained delay compensation can sometimes do that. So if you go to the lower left-hand corner and maybe try to enable, disable and enable constrained delay and just kind of toggle that back and forth, that could help if you see it kind of getting out of sync like that. Okay. Okay, does rendering multiple tracks like this multiply the render time too much? And I think this is maybe going back to where we did our export audio mix down. So it's, it can, depending on how much data, how long the files are, it could take, could take a little while. But you don't have to sit there and do it independently for each track. If you have 200 tracks and you're doing that, or 50 tracks, there's always a 50 times more the possibility of user error. I found, at least with myself. So that kind of takes the user error out, and it may take a couple minutes. Get a coffee, relax, and just let the computer number crunch for you in the background without you worrying about it. Okay, so saying question from Taylor. Since your son is recording with you, do you think he might want to participate in the Hangout if he learned Cubase at this age? Imagine his control over by age 20. He would probably enjoy being on a Hangout, but it might not be so enjoyable for you guys. So, but maybe I'll train him to be my replacement when I retire. He'll be hopefully just graduating college by then. So I'll try to, get him all up to speed early. But, he seems to be doing really well and playing music and interested in music. So I'm glad to see that. But I won't try to be like the baseball or, soccer dad, but if he loves it, great. So. So question, is there a difference in export real time versus processed mixdown in terms of sound quality? There used to be people that would argue about this all the time, because you could choose to do a export audio mixdown, and you could do it in real time where it will just kind of do it as it plays, or you could do it in faster than real time. So, sonically, there's not any difference if you're using any external effects processors or if you're using any external instruments. It would have to, of course, be done in real time, but there's no audio quality difference. And, I've seen people argue both sides that, one sounds better, but if you do a real time one, and, I've done the test many times versus, a processed speed one, and then just simply flip the phase, I've always found that they've canceled. So I've never found a difference in the sound quality. Some people used to think because some systems only did real time that it was superior, but it was really just that they had to physically run it through DSP. So, but those days are kind of gone. So I see a question, how to install Nexus 2 in Cubase. I don't have a copy of Nexus 2, but generally, if you're working with any VST plugins, if you go to your VST plugin manager. If it's a VST3 plugin, make sure that's going to be a 64-bit version versus the 32-bit version. I think Nexus is going to be the VST instrument. I think it's kind of the but where you install to. So if you go to your studio menu to your VST plugin manager, if it's a VST2 plugin, make sure that it's going to go that you have the VST2 and you see this little gear icon in the VST plugin manager, and that make sure that you see the VST2 plugin path, that it's going to be going there. If it's a VST3, which I think it might be, but again, I don't have a license to know for sure. You could at that point just see, you should be able to see it here as you're in the VST instrument list automatically. So, but if not, just make sure it's going into a folder that Cubase is looking into. And then you could just kind of hit refresh there, and you should be able to see any third-party VST instrument or VST plugin. And I'm just seeing another comment here that Nexus 2 is 32-bit only. I think you need to upgrade to Nexus 3. So just a user comment. So if it's 32-bit, you probably won't see it as mentioned. Okay. Thanks again for all the great questions. And if you have learned a tip or trick or something new today, feel free to subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up. Okay. Okay, just reading through questions. Hi, Greg. Can you clarify which VSTs are compatible with the microtuner MIDI insert? I produce ethnic songs which require micro tuning, and I feel that many are not supported, including some of the Cubase VSTs. One of the things that you could, it's probably, I think it'll work with VST2 as well. Let's go ahead and I'll just quickly generate something here. Hang on, my son's knocking on the door. His movie may be over. Bear with me. All right, back. We have movie 2 starting, so apologize for that. So, the micro tuner. So let me go ahead and we'll just add a couple of chords here quickly. Okay, and so we have this, and I'll just load up kind of maybe an older instrument. Okay, so as we come over here, I'll just drag these down and make chords. So we'll go to our MIDI inserts on this particular instrument and go to our micro tuner. Let me see if I could just make the changes while it's going on and see if we hear the difference. Just try some extreme settings and see what sounds. Listen to it there. Now we'll turn it on again. So it seems to be making a difference. So that seems to be working. So, it may not do, I know that within VST 3.5 instruments like Pad Shop and Hallian Sonic SE and Retrolog, that you could have, all the independent, like the MPE control for that. But that seems to be kind of working for an older instrument, which I don't think is VST 3.5. I don't have any third-party plugins on my library, but you could try that, and I could try with maybe an external keyboard to see if it works. But that seems to be changing the sound. So I'll do it one more time with the micro tuner in or without, and then I'll repeat, enable. So it sounds a little different, like there's some waves going on there. So that I think it kind of works with most devices. But, let me know. I could play around with it some more just to find out. Okay, so see, good to see Teddy McCready on the Hangout. It says, I'm running 9.5 Artist with a simple Mac Mini setup, nothing else running on it. Problems that are happening, glitches, does not seem to be running right. Very frustrating. A couple things to check, if you see glitches, and it's kind of a vague term, but, always, if it's kind of, glitching out at times, try going to your studio setup and raising the buffers here. So when you go to the control panel, if you haven't adjusted the buffers up, that if you have like audio glitches, that could be causing the problem. And if you're doing a lot of third-party plugins, sometimes if you have older ones, make sure that they're being updated, and check out, and try to see if you get the similar behavior on, if you notice it's on a particular track that's acting weird. Make sure that you're, try replacing a plugin on it and see if it makes sense, and, try to isolate it, because sometimes, plugins and, it doesn't really indicate which OS you're running, other than on Mac, obviously. But if you, check some of those things to kind of get a variable, I think you might be able to narrow it down. Okay, so let's move on. How can I adjust velocity on MIDI for an entire track and keep the ratios between the notes? I basically just want to turn everything up or down and keep the performance. Okay, so let's say if I come here and I'll just record some nonsensical music with velocity changes here. All right, so we should have some velocity range here. So I'll just kind of. So, there's a couple ways to do it. One is I'll just make it larger. We could, as you select the notes, we could just go to your velocity value here, and let's say I'll just tame some of the extremes of the notes here. So if I wanted to, just raise, the velocity of all those, you could select those particular notes. And from the info line, you could just raise your velocity there. You could also just go directly in the velocity area in the center and just kind of raise and keep that proportionality of your velocities. Or if you wanted to tilt, you could do that as well. So you could just say, I wanted this to be more, go to the corners, and you could tilt the velocity down and kind of scale it. And then say, I want to keep that proportionality just by going in the center and clicking. You'll see like just a little icon there once you have the notes selected. So those are some good techniques for working with velocity. Okay, just reading a comment. Hi, Greg. Just want to say thank you so much for everything you put into the music community. You've saved me my job in so many situations. Have huge respect for you. Thank you for the kind words. I'm just glad I could help people out, especially in these times. I've had wonderful teachers and experiences. So I wanted to make sure that, I think it's an honor to be able to share some of those with and help other people. Okay, so hi, Greg. Tested VST Pro, and afterwards it was not possible to remove all changed items in the project, talkback input, extra channel, and so on. Would you be so kind to start VST Connect Pro and remove it? Sure, we'll do that for you. Okay, so I have my talkback mic. So this is the particular track here. And one of the things, I think you could just remove the selected track. If we go into, you could also just come here and just say remove the VST Connect from the particular menu. And it's going to, perhaps add stuff in your control room that wasn't there. So if you just go to your audio connections to control room here, it's going to create a VST Connect bus. You could right click, remove the Connect bus, and remove the talkback mic. And then you could have that talkback mic available as another input. So those things should allow you to get back to square one. Okay, question, a bit random, I know, but what's the craziest thing you've seen done with Cubase, as in how it's been pushed in number of tracks, etc.? It's a great question. I've seen a lot of people do like amazing live stuff with it. Like the Donnie and Marie show. You wouldn't think Donnie Osmond is like one of the coolest guys I've ever met. And he's done like 57 or 58 albums. He's incredibly prolific, but he did a whole Vegas show that was being run. he called his rack Buford, and he had two different computers doing it, but he had Cubase doing automating the front of house mix, doing his headphone mixes, playing some supplement tracks, doing the light show, just the whole thing completely automated, and then the drummer would have, I think, like a little wireless MIDI controller to start the song, or certain songs he could like during a vamp section, hit a key, and it would just kind of enable like this cycle. So that was really wonderful for live performance to see. And Donnie is very technical, and he set that up. I mean, I helped him with some things, but he's very technically astute. It's always great to see. I think, like, to me, going to Hans Zimmer's place is incredibly inspiring as well, just because there's always that sense of everything is possible, and it's just like, some places it's always, we had to do this cheaper, we had to do this, and Hans is like, oh, sometimes I just want to spend a lot of money because it will give me more money for the next film. And it may be a total screw up, and I could just blow everything. It'll be a total disaster, but I'm gonna go for it, So seeing that kind of that creative workspace is really, and how it just, total kind of balls to the wall, pushing the systems and constantly. So, and I know it's great for the Steinberg team to see that, and see, what he's doing, and, so I think those are some really interesting scenarios. And I've been in, hanging out with Stevie Wonder and watching him use Cubase as a blind person and see how fast he is with it. Those are really interesting things, and how people are using it in some unique scenarios. But I also love just going to some guy who, has a little corner in the basement and seeing how he's working, and what challenges they come across as well. That's equally fascinating to me. So a lot of times people hire me to do consulting at their house, and I always love seeing how people have things set up, and their approach to things is really interesting to me. Okay, so question, in an official Cubase video about Very Audio, and a presenter moved the colored blocks that change the pitch, play the notes. When I do the same drag, it doesn't sound the notes. Why? All right, so we'll show you the trick to this. And thanks everyone for great questions. Appreciate it. All right, now that I've destroyed this project, I'll revert it. Okay, so if I wanted to come here, let's look at our lead vocal here, and I'll just take it into Very Audio. Okay, so you may notice that as I move, and let me just make sure I have my connections configured. Now you're packing boxes, ready to leave. Okay, so once I'm here, you'll see a little icon that's acoustic feedback. So you want to make sure that it's being routed into the control room. So, go to your audio connections. Certain aspects get sent to what's called a listen bus. I think it's not really documented. So you could have your outputs defined here, but not connected. And in the control room, add a monitor. You'll see a monitor, and then have your definition here of where that's being sent. So as I look at this particular little snippet here, and I have this turned on, the auto acoustic feedback, I could now just kind of come here. So if I, have that set to off and I move it, you don't hear. But once that's enabled, you'll hear those changes. And I saw, like, on Facebook this week, and while I'm here, someone was like, every time you do editing, it's just so loud. You could adjust the volume just with this little slider here. So if you wanted that to be softer, so it doesn't blare out of your speakers. you could adjust the volume. So make sure that the control room's enabled and that you have the acoustic feedback turned on. And then I think you'll hear the segments as they're moved. Okay, so we see PLE, the Project Logical Editor, allows selecting parts based on criteria like position, name, etc., but it affects all tracks in the same situation with select beyond current. But it affects all tracks the same situation with select beyond the cursor. How to apply those functions only on selected track. So we'll go to the Project Logical Editor, and this is kind of a really, powerful editor, and it can be intimidating at first, but once you kind of get the logic of it. So, what we could do is set up conditions like, okay, we want to select, tracks. So we could say, container type. So let's say a media type or a container type is tracks. And then we could say that, contains name. And let's say like this is called Andrea's the lead vocal name. So now if I wanted to, I could just, have it apply and select tracks based on those criteria. Now, one of the conditions, and you could set up all sorts of, and the question is how to apply these functions only on selected track. So I think if you come here, you could say property, and then we could say property is set to event is selected. And that way it won't do every single track that's not selected, but you could use that as a condition that you've created in the Project Logical Editor. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have a question. What is the difference between bounce, render in place, and export audio mixdown? All right, so great question. So if we are bouncing an audio file, let's say if I come here and maybe I've done, all sorts of, edits. I'll have a fade in. Let's adjust the volume really small on that. Let's, adjust our position here. So let's say I'll just slip that audio later in time. And let's say now I have these kind of broken into different segments and I wanted this to now be one audio file. That's when I would probably do a bounce selection. So I go to my audio menu and I would just choose bounce, and I always lose this in. Okay, it's sitting right there below where I should be looking. So, and choose bounce selection. That's going to make a new audio file. And I choose a replace, and that audio file is now a separate audio file that's been incorporated into the project. So it doesn't affect the original, and we can do that. Now, if I wanted to do something very similar to that, another approach, and sometimes these are just different approaches to, the same concept. I could say I want to take that and I could do a render in place. So from my edit menu, and we could choose to do render in place. And we do this. And then I should just show the settings. This will automatically create, we could have this with our render and play settings. We could, again, under the edit menu, this would give us some more flexibility where, okay, I wanted to mute the source tracks and put those onto their own tracks, or I could keep the source events unchanged. I could make them one block event. I can make it one event or separate events. With the render in place, I could also include it, just the dry settings. I could include the insert sends, the effect sends. So I could have inserts, channel strip, EQ. I could add channel effects and add the master effects for processing. So that's a little more flexible for that. So that's kind of what the render in place gets you. So you have, more flexible naming and inclusion of processing. And when we do an export audio mix down, and that would automatically kind of place it, either you could replace the file or have it go directly underneath. And we do an export audio mix down. This is when I would often do for doing stems. And this is how a lot of people still work, because it was, if you've been running Cubase for a long time, we could export the files. We can't necessarily embed the effects processing inside of it. And as we would do the export, it's going to show up if we choose to import into the file at the very bottom. So if I was doing like a bunch of tracks where like, okay, here's stems, so you can load it into your program and not mess it up, probably the export audio mix down makes sense. If you wanted a lot more flexibility, I would do the render in place and bounce selection just for quick dirty. I did a bunch of edits. I just want to make this one audio file instead of 16 different audio files that have been kind of, edited together. Just kind of consolidate things. That's when I would do bounce selection. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Just going through questions. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, so we have 281 people watching. It's fantastic. Great. Okay, so we'll move on. Is there a way to hide the folder track in a project window, like a mixer window, to save space when working on big templates? So let's go ahead and I don't think I have any folder tracks in this one, so I'll go ahead and make one. So I'll just select multiple tracks, and let's move selected tracks to new folder. And I think if we go to visibility, we could just click right there and hide folders as well as individual tracks within folders. So now I have this as a folder. Just go, select the visibility here and just uncheck the visibility, and the folder track will be hidden for you. So that's an easy way to be able to hide your folder tracks. Okay, so we have a question. When you have automation on groups or buses, how do you move them together with the rest of the tracks without having to select it manually? So that's a good question. So let's go ahead and create this scenario real quick. Jump to this project. Thanks again for all the wonderful questions. And if you've learned a tip or trick, feel free to give a thumbs up to the Hangout here. So let's go ahead and automate some of my groups here. So sorry. One way to do this that would be pretty easy is, so you see the automation here. If we have all of these within a folder, and, you could, when you go to add a group track, you get a choice whether you want to create, and the terminology is a little odd. I'm kind of lobbied to get the terminology changed, but you have this create outside folder or create inside folder. And if you choose create inside folder, it gets added to the very bottom into a groups folder. But if you choose to create outside folder. What that does is basically that places it below the selected track. So if I have those groups within the folder and I wanted to move its automation and the different tracks all simultaneously, once they're in a folder, I could move the folder as an entity here. Didn't look like that. Did it? Let me make sure those are. And I might have to just. I think by default there's automation follows events. So let's see if I just select those. So if you select those together, I would think that maybe it would automatically do that, but it's not actually tied to an event. So as long as they're selected, the automation for your groups would carry over. So if I wanted to include this, if I come here and include this part as well, so let's say if I wanted to include my drums with their automation and this guitar part, I could select those. I thought that would function. So if they're selected, you could move them as an entity together. So it's, because they're different tracks, and it's not going to show up as an event here. And one of the things that you could do also to make this a little easier is there's an automation parameter. So once you hit F6 to go to the automation parameter, and if you go to settings, if you don't know this trick, you could say reveal parameter on write. And then anytime that you write automation, it could automatically just show up on the project window for you. So try that, but you may have to select the automation for your groups with the actual tracks and then move them all at the same time. Okay, so we have a question: how to set middle C to C4, not C3? We had this discussion on the last Hangout, and it's a bit of a nebulous area within the MIDI specification of what middle C is. So different companies have it as C3 or C4. And the reason why there's kind of the discrepancy is because I think the ISO standard was based on the piano notes from the piano being the full musical range. But the MIDI specification itself has 128 notes. So there isn't a way to automatically do that. But a lot of controllers will allow you to kind of specify what octave middle C is spitting out. But there isn't a way in Cubase, but I'll make sure to pass on that request again. Okay. So it says if you use a generic remote controller, every time you add a new track, assigned knobs become useless. Is there any way to link them to track other than standard track number position? You could try just using quick remotes, and we had this question sent in about emailed in, so we'll kind of cover two birds with one stone about how to set up like quick control. So we have quick controls here. We had a question earlier about them being enabled by default. So if I come here, we could just have a preset. So I'll just have, like, for an audio track, my volume and panning set up. When we go to our studio menu, we go to studio setup, and we can now go to VST quick controls, or I'll go to my track quick controls. And I could, so say I have this control set up to be, 20 MIDI CC 121. I'm going to just click on learn, and then I move a knob here. And then I could do this for all of my controls. And you could have these quick controls for various things. So now I could just, move my faders here on my MIDI controller, and I could control this, and we could switch, different send levels that we want to do here. But you could also just come and create your own, quick control parameters for different aspects and save that as a preset. So maybe instead of like having a generic quick control, see if you could, maybe have it set up as a quick control preset. And then that way you could just load that into any track that you want and just come here and say, okay, I'm controlling, the volume on this track. I go here, I'm controlling, the volume here, wherever I have those set, and you don't have to reassign it per track. Okay. Okay, just it says you can send the output of MediaBase, send to another output channel, other, I think, than channels 1 and 2. So this might be the question of, can you, I'm not sure if it's a question or a statement, but I'll take it as a question. Can you send the output of the MediaBase end to another output other than 1 and 2? It's really whatever you define in your connection. So when you go to your audio connections, go to your control room and choose your monitor, and then you could, and whatever monitor is selective and active, that is where the control room settings are stored. So if you want to have 1 and 2, go to one set of speakers, and 3 and 4, if you wanted to monitor off that, you could set that. Okay. Another question. Hello, Greg. Can you please explain how to randomize the velocity in a MIDI single drum track, example snare drum with a logical editor, or how to change the whole velocity values of a drum part? Sure, I'm glad to. Okay, so just load up quick preset here. Okay, so let's say. Okay, so let's say if I want to, we'll just go ahead and solo this quickly. Okay, so I will, if we're using Groove Agent, one of the cool things is I could just create the drum map from the instrument. And now, once we have a drum map loaded up, we could just double click and see it in our drum editor. We could have different views. So if you want to see all the drum samples, we could do that. Or if you wanted to only show drum sounds with particular events. So let's say I have my snare. And let's just set all of my snare velocities to be the same. Something like kind of boring like that. So I could go to my logical editor. And we're going to say, different MIDI messages will have different like value 1. So in a MIDI note message, value 1 is pitch, value 2 will be set to velocity. So we're going to say velocity between 1 and 127. And so what I want to do, and we could say I want this on D1 if you wanted to, and what we want to do to value 2 of our note message is to set random values between, let's say, 80 and 120. So now I have those drum notes selected. It'll now just set the random values. So if I say between 60 and 120, I'll just hit apply, and then that will just, and you could just keep doing different random values like that. So set to transform, say the velocity or value 2, and set a range. Just so you could even do, I only want notes with velocities between 100 and 120 to have random values only on D1, so you could set up conditions just to do that. But yeah, experiment with the logical editor. You could do so many creative things and save a preset, and you could actually just fire off a particular, user key command to trigger presets. And that's how a lot of composers will just take like, string parts and have, do accents like, like on every third or every fourth note, stuff like that. So hopefully that helps, but play around with the logical editor. Okay, so we see a question, is it possible to select a MIDI note and move it using the keys on the MIDI keyboard? Okay, let me just create another MIDI part here quickly. So I'm just going to reread it again. So if you wanted to just change the pitch of particular notes, I think if you click on this MIDI input, I could say, let's just have the pitch change. So now if I hit, we could kind of go through, select a particular note here, and whatever note I hit, it'll just automatically go directly to that pitch. And then, so if you have like a phrase that you wanted to play, you could do like very creative stuff. Like, I want to take this note, and let's say if I've split it a bunch of times, this is a great composer trick. I come here, hold down the Alt key. I now have a bunch of notes. Now I could just, with this mode on, so turn on the MIDI input, I could just play. And as I hit pitches on my piano keyboard, I'm just setting the pitches. So I think that's maybe what you wanted to accomplish, but I'm not sure if you want to move it in time. You could probably do that through a generic MIDI remote, but if you just want to change the pitch by hitting MIDI, that's a great way to approach it. Okay, so it says for MIDI instrument tracks, you can select all MIDI in or individual controllers. Is it possible to select more than one, but not all controllers per track? So if you're not inputting data from all the controllers, it's not going to see anything or affect anything. So if you have all controllers, that's going to allow you to set up, if you have 2 controllers or 3 controllers, and we have some people that will have like, a controller has a great piano feel, and maybe one that's, another controller that's spitting out MIDI CCs, and maybe another controller from an iPad. So, but if you don't send any information from a controller, it's not going to be seen. So you kind of have the choice of a dedicated controller or multiple controllers. And again, it won't necessarily, it's not going to record any information if the controller wasn't used. So it's kind of a light switch, one or multiple, as opposed to filtering out. If you really wanted to filter out controllers, you could go to, if you get to your studio setup, to your MIDI port setup, and you could have particular controllers not active. So if you didn't want Cubase to see them, you could set it up in a not active manner as well. So I see a question: is it possible to select locked parts by clicking on it? Okay, it is possible to select locked parts by clicking on it, but when I use a Project Logical Editors function, select all events, locked parts stay unselected. So let's see if I could create that quickly. Thanks everyone for great questions. Really a lot of fun today. All right, so I have these events locked, these events not below. So the top two are locked. So get to the Project Logical Editor. Yeah, it looks like that's how it works. So if I just come here and we'll select everything. So I can see where maybe that shouldn't be a criteria if it's locked, but if it's, let me just check the locked position. Yeah, it seems to be kind of functioning the same way for me. So I'm not sure if there's a logic behind that or it's just maybe an oversight. Okay, so we have a question. How can I convert my waves in my project? Some are 44.1, some are 48K. So, it's always good, obviously, to run a common sample rate within your project. But if you have files that are different sample rates, what you could do is go into your media menu and go to the pool. And at this point, you could select, all of your files. Here you could clearly see, the sample rate of different projects and different files within. And at this point, what you could do is just right click, and then there's a function. Convert files. So you could find all of your, 44.1 files and, convert to sample rate. So you could just simply say, and that will take your 44.1, turn it to 48, or the other way around. So go to your pool window, and then you could just convert. There's also a preference to be aware of. So as we go into this, I think it's going to be under. And you'll see on import options dialog under preferences, under editing audio, you could convert to the project settings, and that will automatically do sample rate conversion for you as files are put in. Okay, so we have a question. What is the best computer setup for a MIDI-sized studio using Cubase? Most of the computers are running great these days. So if you have anything, like my personal studio computer is probably 11 years old and still runs huge programs and plugins. It's not, Mac or PC doesn't really matter. I interchange between both of them all the time. I kind of have a MacBook Pro for work that I use, but my studio I use PC, and I also run Windows 10 on my MacBook Pro. So going back and forth between the OSs is fine, but if you're doing a big orchestral thing, having, solid state drives are fast and a lot of RAM are helpful. If you're doing some basic, pianos and drums, anything will basically work for you. Okay, so we have a question, Greg. How do you show the audio wave in the automation lane? So that's also kind of a lot of people. I remember doing a seminar in Los Angeles once, and someone was really mad because they, couldn't get a sense of when they were drawing in automation of where it was related to in a waveform. So if you go to the automation panel, which you get access by hitting F6, go to the settings, and then there's a little option here for show data on tracks. And then as soon as you do that, you can draw in the automation and see the waveform kind of outlined for you underneath. Okay. Okay, for MIDI instrument tracks, you can select all MIDI in or individual containers. If possible, select more than one, but not all controllers per track. Okay, so I think we covered that. Okay. Okay, looks like we have the same kind of question entered a bunch of times, so. Okay, it says, hello, Greg, from Germany, bought an SSL X desk, 8-channel mixer, do not know how to send a signal to Cubase, 10.5, my sound card, Avid HD Omni, has a D-sub cable, how to get signal from analog mixer. So probably what you need to do is to, all right, so it says my sound card, Avid HD Omni, have a D-sub cable. So if you have a D-sub cable, so you're probably with that interface with the SSL X desk. And if it's an analog console, I'm not that familiar. One of my dear friends works there. But it sounds like it's just an 8-channel analog mixer. So if you have a D-sub cable on the Omni, on your Avid, what you need to do is to get the D-sub cable with like an XLR inputs and take the XLR outs from your SSL desk into the D-sub, into the XLR connections that connect to the Avid Omni via D-sub, and that's just basically a multi-pin cable. and then you should be able to see all of your inputs from the SSL through the Avid Omni interface into Cubase. So. Okay. Hi, Greg. Can you render in place an event region, including its sound effects that are automated on the selected track? So, yeah, let's go ahead and do it really quickly. So we'll do something silly with a send effect here. Okay, so let's say we'll take our snare track. Let me turn up the volume here a little bit. Okay, so I will just kind of come here, and let's say we'll take our snare track. Okay, so let's say if I cut that particular track there, I will just erase kind of before and after. So we'll go ahead and just listen to. And of course I failed to automate the track. So I'll do that one more time. I hate when it's operator error. Okay, so just take that, listen to it again. Okay. So now I will render in place. I think this should do the trick. So go to edit menu to render in place. And I'm going to render with a complete signal path, which will include descends. And now let's see if I did it right. So it's dry, then dry, then wet. So that's how you could do it. So to render in place, we'll include the automation, we'll include the effects. So you just want to make sure that as you do it, that you come over here and again, just include, and that will automatically mute the other track as well if you want to. So again, just go to edit, render in place, and then you'll have like the render in place settings that you could do. And then, then just choose a complete signal path. Okay, just move on. It's a good comment. This is one of the great things I find about Hangouts. It's like, never mind, can you change multiple track pictures? I had no idea you could even add a track picture. So yeah, it's always, I'm always learning new stuff as well in the Hangout. So it's kind of fun. Okay, so a question, how can I get my template to remember external device setups in MIDI device manager? I have to import them every time. So when we do this, And so just come over here to the audio connections, and it's probably going to be your external instruments. If you're running an older version, I want to say it was at 9.5. There was a little issue where it could be causing like the external effects to get blown out, and it was resolved. Sometimes it depends on if there was different audio connections through core audio, such as HDMI. I remember dealing with this with BT on his Cubase setup. But if you have, I think it was fixed like right before 10. So see if you have that. But one other thing to try, just out of curiosity, and sometimes, if you have templates that have been built up from several versions, go over to your profile manager and try just saving your profile, and that will include all of your preferences and IO setups. And, while it's kind of functioning, and try to, maybe see if you import that profile, if that makes a difference for you. But I think there was some, I remember kind of going through that with BT on his Cubase rig. Okay. Okay, we're doing okay on time. Thanks everyone for great questions. If you've learned a new tip or trick, please feel free to give a thumbs up. Apparently I irritated 2 people. It gave me a thumbs down, so it's always a bummer. I used to always get like a thumbs down before the Hangout started, so that was interesting. Okay. Let's see. One of the glitches is the screen showing measures will move left to right when I'm trying to edit. Other little glitches like this. Would you suggest really loading Cubase? So frustrated right now. Okay, this is Teddy's point. Okay, so if you see that while you're editing of this screen, I'm not sure if your whole perspective is moving left to right, but one thing to be aware of, like when you're editing, is Teddy, is just to check your auto scroll, and that way it's not going to necessarily advance, as the playhead gets out. So, I sense your frustration. If you want to send me a message on, you could reach out to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. And I know you sent messages via Facebook as well. I'd be happy to take a quick look at your system. But, always try. One thing to try is hold down Teddy, for if you're running into like weird stuff. Sometimes, the preferences can get corrupted. So try starting the program by holding down Command Option Shift and hold that down, and then try starting the program with the preferences disabled. It won't delete them, and see if you get different behavior. So I see a question: can you show how to make a strong, punchy, but well-rounded sub bass? It's always great to try to accomplish something that's, let's see if I have a project that might fit, like completely subjective descriptions. But a lot of times you could do it through, compression and EQ. Let me just see. I don't really have so much like kind of, I think I have like one EDM project, but I don't, I need to get some hip hop projects from friends. If anyone wants to donate a hip hop project for me to use, I'll gladly accept. So let's see if I come here. So it's a, I mean, retrolog is a, just put that in a loop here real quick. So, changing some of the synth sounds, you could do that. And then also, if you wanted to dial in EQ, so I'm not sure if that's kind of what you had in mind for perhaps a round sub bass, but but I think kind of playing with the different the different instruments. If you're doing kind of hip hop EDM stuff, retrolog is kind of a monster instrument. Okay, just okay, so it says, hello, I have a problem. Please help me, someone. I have Cubase 10 Pro. I couldn't find instrument. It says missing files. I have no idea about it. I'm a beginner. Make sure, like when you download Cubase, it is like a 21 gigabytes or so if you have Cubase 10 Pro. So I've seen some people just run the installer just for the application, but not necessarily for all of the instruments. So, make sure that you have like kind of the full download. Some people will just get like, get like the update or, depending on if you're updating from previous versions. But if you do the full install, make sure you do the full install and download from that. And then all of your instrument sound should come, should be installed and active. Okay. Okay, just going through different questions. Okay. Okay, so just seeing, is there a way to bypass all inserts on all channel and sends? So like we showed that a bit earlier, just in case you missed it. And I know probably the question may have been reiterated again. But if you go over here to F3, here's where you could bypass all the inserts in the project by holding down the Alt key, or bypass all the EQs, or bypass all the channel strips, or all the sends. So just these little icons here. So hold down Alt or Option, and then you could do that directly from the mixer with one mouse click. Okay. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. This is Hiram from Las Vegas. Could you please say something about how we get the most out of the Cubase channel strip? I think the Cubase channel strip's really, fairly underutilized. So, it's great processing that's in there. So, take a quick look, and, I think, one of the things that some people miss is the fact that of being able to change different components and the signal flow order. So just get this project open here. My Cubase didn't like that. Sorry with that. Sorry about that. Let me just bear with me a second, see if I get it. Restart it. All right, I'm just gonna pause the hangout for a second, and let me just see if I get my computer back. Hang on just 1 second. I'm gonna reboot my computer, so bear with me for just a second. Apologize for this. Sometimes we have weird IT stuff for our corporate computers, so just bear with me. All right, so apologize for that. Sometimes I have all sorts of weird IT stuff going on, corporate IT stuff on my computer, and multiple interfaces going on simultaneously. So, all right. So let's go ahead and we'll go back to the question about channel strip. So, being able to use the channel strip, and I'm just going to just check audio real quick, make sure that's all. Okay. So just using the channel strip is really a good start. So a lot of people underutilize it. So you have, great noise gates, 3 different compressors, different EQs, different tools where for de-essing, envelope shaper. You could also have, different forms of saturation and limiting kind of all built in. Being able to just move the channel strip order around is super helpful. A lot of people also may want to have the channel strip in a different order for signal flow. So here we can see our inserts in a signal flow before the channel strip, but if I click here on this button, we could actually switch the signal flow between the channel strip. So, and it's a question that we got on the last hangout, was like someone was almost felt bad because they felt that the channel strip was working great for them. And like if they're missing out on not using, a bunch of, other third party plugins. I was like, if it's working great for you, it's great processing, take advantage of it and use it. Okay. Okay, just reading. Okay, so it says, "Hey Greg, how is it? How are things?" Okay, I have this question I would like to ask. If you cut your audio into many clips, how can you change them back to the original audio? Is there a shortcut at this option? So if I come here and I have cut my audio, so let's say I just hold down my Alt or Option key with my scissors, and I've cut the audio like so. Um, you know, you could just, if you wanted to, so now these will all be, kind of individual parts. So if I just come here, we could select our individual parts. But as we, if I wanted to, I could also just kind of grab my glue gun and then hold down on my Alt key and I could glue them all back together. So even though I had cut the audio, let's say if I erase that, this will be non-destructive. So I could get that data back that was erased by extending my bottom right handle or my bottom left handle of the subsequent event. So you could do it just like that. All right, so I know we had some questions that were emailed in. I want to make sure we get to those. I prepared a project for that. Let's just go to activate this. All right, so we had a question from Joe Teresi in Rochester, and he's been working really hard in the supermarket, providing food for all the people during our COVID-19 crisis. So kudos to him I know he's working long hours and catching the hangouts when he can. Okay, so it says, if I have a series of snare hits on a single track and I cut them up, is there an easy way to export each snare hit in one shot rather than creating a separate marker for each hit? In other words, let's say I have 5 snare hits on a track. I cut them up, maybe do a fade out on each, then export each of the 5 snare hits. So I would find 5 wave files waiting for me in my selected folder, ready to import into Stephen Slate's trigger program. So let's take a look at that. So let's just say we have some drums here in this particular folder. I'll just open up our mix console, and let's say we'll have our snares here. So we'll go ahead and I'll just solo. Okay, so if I want to take like the snares of this particular section and have them automatically split to different files, I'm just going to double click, and then we go into our sample editor where we see here in the bottom, and I will go to hit points. So as soon as I, go to hit points, I can see my hit points at the snare hits. And what I want to do now is I'm going to create regions of that. Okay. And now, as soon as I come here, so let's see if I did it right. Hang on. Or create events. Well, you could do regions as well in this case. So we can see all of our regions. This is one way. So now I see my regions of all my snares. And you could go directly into the pool window. There's kind of several ways to do this. And we would see our snare top, and then we could have all the regions. And you could set this up to, I think if you go to processes, to audio, to bounce selection, that's one approach of doing it. How I was originally thinking of doing this for kind of your workflow, Joe, would be we're going to double click, and then I'm going to create not regions, but events. So now when I come here, it's created different events for each of those hits. And if I wanted to, so even though this will be referencing the same audio file, if I want to now at this point, say I'll select all of these events here, then go to the render in place. And we'll go to our render in place settings. And I'll say, let's do these as separate events. I'll keep the dry, so I don't need any processing. And at that point, we could choose to, just can mute the original source events. And we're going to render these. It's going to create the individual snare hits based upon the transients. And now when we go into our pool window, we're going to see all of our new snares, and those could be just automatically as separate independent audio files, done very quickly. Okay. So next question, and I think we covered this a little bit. Hello, my name is Vince. I've been trying to set up my quick controls in Cubase for a while now. I've watched several tutorials and followed all instructions, but still I'm unable to get it to work for me. My MIDI controller is set up correctly as I'm able to record MIDI data when working on a project, but when I try to set up track controls, I turn all the knobs and learn is ticked, but nothing moves. Any help would be extremely awesome. I run Cubase 10 Pro on a Mac High Sierra. So, if I come here, we'll go to our studio menu to studio setup, and we'll select our track quick controls. And the thing that a lot of people miss is to make sure, and depending upon your MIDI controller, to make sure that you have the right MIDI ports for inputs and outputs defined. Some controllers will have a different port for the transport, a different port for the sliders, and a different port for the keys. So make sure that you have that automatically determined. And one way to do this, if you want to know which port is, if you make a MIDI track, and you could go directly into MIDI inserts, and there's a plugin called MIDI monitor. And as you would move, a particular fader on your device, that would automatically capture that and show you which fader it is. So I will go ahead and, I know we touched on this, so make sure that that port is set up correctly. So let's say if I just have another port and I just wanted to click on learn. So once these inputs and outputs are configured, I could just select any of the controllers, and then that's automatically going to, capture that particular controller as we move the event. So now, once that's done in the track quick controls, you should see that reflected. So if you're not seeing that, I think it's probably your MIDI input and output not connected. So when I go to, this particular track, I go to my track quick controls. Now my MIDI fader, as I move it, is automatically adjusting my volume and my pan, my low cut, high cut, frequency on and off. So everything that I would kind of expect. So I think it's probably your MIDI port configuration is not set right. So check that. Okay. It says, thanks for all your great work with the explanations in the Cubase Hangouts. Maybe you can help me in the next Club Steinberg Hangout. I know how to make macros. I know how to assign them to a key command. However, in this case, I can't find the right commands in the macro to set up to the macro. This is the macro I want to create. It's file, print, PDF, save as Adobe, PDF, smaller, file size, continue, location, insert name. Okay. The first two steps are easy, and then what? So, generally the macros, and as you discovered, the macros you could do a tremendous amount with. But like if you're doing something, like for a score, the macros are set up for, different key commands. I think there's 2,500 or so key commands that are accessible in macros for making key commands. So, but it's not necessarily like if I'm here and I go to my score editor and I want to see, I say, let's get a file to print. We could do that. And, you could choose PDF, but maybe not every single window is going to have a function that could be addressed by a keyboard shortcut. So, and I think the scenario you described, runs into that pretty quickly. So you're not going to be able to do a macro for every single thing and automate the naming of, particular tracks that you're working with. So that's probably why you're not seeing it. Maybe we'll see, some future navigation. I know like screen reader programs, sometimes you can have it, for blind people, you can, have the mouse, move to the center, then move down slightly to activate a field. But the built-in Cubase macros don't allow you to do that, unfortunately. Okay. All right, so we have a question. I noticed that the iOS version of VST Performer is not compatible with the current version of VST Connect Pro 4. How do I use it then? It's, the last time I checked, which is a few days ago, the VST Connect Performer for iOS, I think, is just waiting for approval from Apple. So it's done on our side, and they're just waiting to go through the App Store Apple approval process. So it should be pretty imminent. So just kind of keep your eye out for that. Okay, so got this question. Hi, Greg. Love your Hangouts and wondered if you could answer an issue that's plagued me for years in Cubase and drives me nuts. Okay, we'll try to make it work. Says I link an outboard Roland XP80 to Windows PC via MIDI cables. I write songs and I can select patch names for Cubase Inspector. Next time I come to play the song in Cubase, the XP80 does not get a message to select the right patch. If I momentarily change the patch up one in Cubase and then back, a signal is sent, and the XP80 has the right patch. Chase program change event is set in the MIDI preferences, but expect this only applies to data recorded. I could, I guess, somehow record the sysx patch bank of, I guess this is what you do. A program change event is info in the beginning of the event track in Cubase, but it becomes very long-winded. Is there a Roland incompatibility? So, one thing to do, and sometimes, this is, the bane of working with external hardware with program changes. Sometimes they're not quite, and it's not a Roland versus Yamaha versus Chord kind of thing. But if we come to this patch name here, I could say, I'll just do like a JV 1080. So I will come here and I'll go to my MIDI device manager. So just go to my studio menu and let's go to the MIDI device manager, and I'll just install, I think the JV 1080 is almost the rack version of the XP80 if memory serves from 20 years ago. And I'll just make sure this is going out to my Steinberg interface. So once we have that configured, I can now just say, I want to route this out to my JV 1080. Let me make sure I did that right. Sorry. Okay, so now I'll add a MIDI track. And we'll select its output to our JV 1080. And, we can just kind of pop here. And once we have that done, we could select the patch names. All right, so generally, like when we do this and you hit play, Cubase will, if you play it from the beginning, the program change should trigger. If you start over here, if you start the song, it may not catch the program change because it's going to be before it starts. But one thing that you could do if you do have, let's say, a MIDI event, and I have this particular patch selected, if you go to MIDI, and if I look at this particular part, and we'll do it just in a list editor, old school, and we can see that there's no data in that part, but I have the program change embedded here. But if I go to my MIDI and we choose to just do a freeze MIDI modifiers, and then we look at the list editor, that will automatically embed the program change and bank change for that patch. So that when we do that, that will embed it directly into the part. So try just setting up try doing the freeze MIDI modifiers for the particular track, and that should actually physically embed the program and bank change message into the track. So give that a shot and let me know if that works out for you. Okay. Okay, so we had a question about T guitar, and this is a new instrument for Hallian, done by, I think, Acoustic Instruments. So it's a really kind of wonderful guitar. So let's go ahead and just open it up. And this is I think a Taylor guitar that's been sampled. So, we could have different modes for this, and one of the modes that we could have is set the pattern. So we could come over here, and it does an amazing job of being able to, I play just a G chord here, and I could just, play bad piano chords, and it would map it. And then I could play the individual voices. So you could do stuff like that, just play. And what Taylor's question was, if I understood it right, was when he was in chords mode, you could have different chords on each of these pads. So if I come here, you could just click on an individual note and say, I wanted a pop when I hit this C, strumming pattern. But when I go to a D chord, I wanted this to be kind of folk. So I'll just come here. Sorry, I'm playing the flute track in the background before next question. So when I hit a D, I could switch patterns. And so if I wanted a different pattern for that C note again, you could just kind of click and say I wanted this to be more a blues pattern. So that's, and I think Taylor was running into problems where he wasn't able to assign the different strumming to different notes, but it seems to be working for me. But if you haven't, if you're interested in simulating like an acoustic guitar, this is a fantastic plugin, and it's obviously much cheaper than a Taylor guitar. But so let me know if you've experimented any more with it, Taylor. Okay. Okay, and I get this question a lot. Can you explain a proper setup with Cubase on doing tutorials, like how you do your setup for the stream or for recorded tutorials on YouTube? I know OBS software is part of it. I'm curious how you have your setup. So I get this question a lot, and a lot of people, it's very tricky to, I often have, I think I have, 3 or 4 different audio interfaces going on simultaneously with this. So I'll give a quick rundown because I know a lot of people want to be able to kind of set up their audio. So I use OBS, which is free software, and you create a scene. So I made a Hangout scene, and you could add different sources. So if you click on the plus sign, so I added a display, and I take a USB mixer. So I take my audio outputs of my computer, and I connect it into a Yamaha, I think it's an MW12CX. You could use other mixers. And And this mixer has a USB output. So my microphone is connected into the mixer. The audio outputs from my laptop are going to a UR24C audio interface. Its outputs are going into the mixer as well. So I have kind of a separate stream for Cubase audio and a separate stream for what OBS is doing. That's kind of, and I found that to work really well. So, you could go to, I try to make sure everything is always at 1920 by 1080 resolution. And I just want to make sure I'm not destroying my Hangout here. If I go to settings, I, will try to keep, your output, set your output rate, your audio interface. So what interface it is. Video, I like to do 1920 by 1080 because people can watch it on their TV easily. So once you have that all set up, you would get your stream key. So this is kind of what it looks like on the stream key. So when you go to youtube.com, you sign into your account. So I log in. I'm one of the administrators on the Steinberg Cubase. So you log in as youtube.com/ once you switch your account, if you have a personal one, to switch to the account that you want to do the broadcasting on. And then you could copy this stream key here. And then that stream key, I would go into my OBS settings and we'd see under stream and you just paste it there. Then in OBS, I click on start stream. You'll see like this little green light indicating that it's ready to go. Within just the web browser, once you have that done, you'll see if you have a good connection to OBS, and that stream key is the key that connects those two. Then come over here and click on end stream or start stream, go live, I think it'll say. And then you'll be able to go. So again, I go, my microphone is connected, to the mixer. My audio outs from my laptop is connected to the same mixer. That way, when my son screams or something, I could mute the channel on the mixer quite easily. And I keep those two different paths separate. When I do just a straight tutorial without being broadcast, I use on a Mac ScreenFlow. I'm thinking of migrating over to OBS. And generally what I do on ScreenFlow is I go out of the Mac's audio out, and that's captured by ScreenFlow. And recently I've been using just a Rode NT USB mic. And I just record my voice, and that allows me to have my voice and the computer audio on separate tracks. So I can, if I sound really dumb and, say stupid things, I could edit my voice out. So that's kind of a quick run through. So I try to keep it a bit separate for audio interfacing for the stream versus audio interfacing for Cubase. So a lot of people may not have to do that if you're not doing audio. If you're doing like a Zoom meeting, that's probably not as critical, but I found separating those two streams makes a big difference. And if you don't have a USB mixer, go out of one interface into maybe another interface and have those two separate ones done. So that's a quick overview. So there's lots of people, and I have kind of a quick YouTube tutorial. Like I did a tutorial for internally within people for Yamaha, and I'm willing to share that with anyone. If you email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de and include your email address, and I'd be happy to kind of send over the tutorial on how I got it set up in a little more detail. So I hope that helps. And there's a lot of people trying to get it figured out, and there's a lot of bad solutions. Okay, so moving on to the next question. There's two ways to crossfade, maybe more, using the X key or have an icon enabled. What is the difference in when cut wave sections and glue together, when comping and finishing comping? So I was just helping one of my friends in a very popular band last night. We're going over this. So let's say if we had a comped part here, we could. So I'll just go ahead solo this, and let's say we're going to have. And if I wanted to comp a particular part here, and I'm just see if I. Just see if I have my audio connections here. Just try reloading the project. Bear with me a second, sorry. I may have just jinxed myself by going through all my streaming settings. All right, let me see if I could exit out really quickly. See if this is gonna. Sorry about that. All right, so let's take a look. So when doing comping, there's a couple different approaches to it. So if I wanted to, and so if we have our comped tracks here, I could open up the lanes, and at this point, grab my comping tool, and as I want to just come up with my different regions, we could select and just come up with different takes that we're using. So if this is our comped part, and what we could do now is at this point just hide the lanes, and we can see that we'll have kind of indications that there's multiple lanes underneath. And in Cubase, when you click here, there's going to be you could have auto fades activated. So this is probably the icon that you're referring to within a question. But if you need to, it can just automatically, if you just hit the X key, if you select all the events, that will do slight crossfades between your different sections when comping. So I hope that makes sense for you. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay, and further questions with this is what happens when you render. The fades will be taken into account. Okay, so just saw a question, watched old video, and just about kind of rendering in place with Cubase 7 that they had. So Cubase 7, I think it was Cubase 8 that came out with, the render in place functionality. So, if you have Cubase 7 to render like an audio file or a virtual instrument, you'd probably have to use the audio mixdown and choose to insert into the on the after export, choose create audio track, and then that should allow you to do that. But with version 8, so in the video, it may have been a later version than what you saw. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Say a producer feels the chord structure to a previously recorded vocal track is too bland and wants to experiment with new harmonies. Let me move on to one other question. So I don't have to switch projects. Okay, so we have a question maybe for the next hangout. How can I put dynamics or other elements every time on the same exact spot according to the stave? I mean, I can adjust the position of the mezzo piano or fortissimo or crescendos, etc. But how can I make Cubase the organizer for that so the layout looks much cleaner? So let's say if I have a score here and, I was sloppy with my dynamics, entering them in. So as I do this, that they're all going to be slightly different heights, and I wanted those to look, to say better, so more consistent. So if you select all the dynamics, you could right click and just click on a line, and that will move all the different events kind of. And you could also do aligns. So let's say we'll do something really silly and extreme. So if I select those events, and you probably do this per line, and you think you could hold down Shift and double click, and that could select all your dynamic events. But you could also go to the scores, and you can see align elements, and you can say center vertically, and then you could kind of move those together as one collective entity so that you have more consistent placement with that. Okay. Okay, we had a question, Randall from Louisville, Kentucky. Is there a way for the send effects to be populated in their slots so they are added and all you do is turn them on? If there isn't, this should be a great time-saving feature. It seems like a waste of time to manually select my effects on every track from a list. Thanks in advance. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So as soon as I come over here, and I'm just going to check something on my feed real quick. Okay. So if I have an audio track here, and let's say at this point I have a send, so I'll add an effects to, let's say, a stereo revelation. So I'm going to add that particular send. Now if you go to the preferences, so go Cubase to preferences. At this point, I think it's under VST, there's a little preference that says connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. I think that's off by default. So if we enable that preference, and let's add 7 or so audio tracks below that. When we do this, they will all have the send activated in the same send effect slot. So you don't have to manually add it. Then you could enable as you see fit. So that way you could have the same send across multiple channels very easily. Okay. Okay, and then we had a question. Let me just open up in our project. Okay, so if I have a project here, and let's just see if it's playing back for us. Okay. So let's say if I have a chord track. So the question is, say a producer feels a chord structure to a previously recorded vocal track is too bland and wants to experiment with new harmonies, but doesn't want to bother re-recording the singer. Can he export vocal audio to MIDI, then follows as many changes to the chord track, and on the final arrangement, simply reapply the altered MIDI track to the whole vocal audio, saving effort, manually adjusting each very audio note? So if I have my piano part here, and I will just, so you see kind of our piano part, and I'm going to generate the chords based upon our editor here. So I will go to my project and I'll say, let's just create chord tracks, create chord symbols from that part. So now, once I have my vocal, and we'll take this into our very audio. So I'll activate this. And then we could actually colorize based upon the chord track. So green notes fall within the chord, blue notes within the scale, red notes out of key. So if I wanted to create harmonies, I don't have to convert it to MIDI. What you could actually do is just kind of come here and I'll just select a phrase. I'll just grab my range selection tool, select that. And then if you just go to the audio, you could say generate harmony voices. So I'll just say right here, and let's give us 4 harmony parts. And this harmony part is automatically following the data that's in the chord track itself. So I'll select that, and we'll come over here. I'll just drop their volume just a little bit. So whatever I change the chord track to, I can just generate harmony voices. And so you don't have to turn it into MIDI and then turn the MIDI into harmonies. The harmonies can be created automatically just like that. Okay. Okay, let's go back to our questions. Let's make sure. Okay, any recommendations with dealing with a large amount of VST/MIDI tracks, separate contact, VST instances, track instruments? You know, if you're running a multi-core, instrument, you're going to have better scaling if each instrument is in its own instance of your sampler, like Callion or Contact. So that will be more efficient for you. So instead of having one instance with 16 voices in it, have 16 instances with one voice in it. So just see a question. Hi, everybody. One question: how can I remove a hissing sound after exporting my audio mix down from Cubase? You could apply EQ to the particular frequencies depending on the kind of hiss. But the hiss may be indicative of other problems like a gain structure issue. Or maybe, I've seen, I had one producer that left an audio channel in monitor enable with a mic sitting on a couch, and they did the export audio mix down on a track, and, didn't work out so well for them. That was a hard one to figure out. But if you have hiss, kind of check your gain structure, see if it's coming from one particular track. But just doing like an EQ on a particular track could really, help. And your high end EQ is probably going to be, in this region where your hiss is going to be. So see if you could filter it out there. So we have a question. Hi, Greg. I have 5 keyboards that I use as controllers, but none of them I can use to control the transport function. Can you help me? Thanks, great teacher. Thanks for the compliment. So, if you come over here, you just go to this, if you go to the studio setup, you probably just will set up, click on a plus sign and you could set up a generic remote. And here you could say, this keyboard. And as we mentioned before, you might have different ports for transport, different ports for faders, and then this would allow you to take any MIDI message. So you could define your MIDI message here. So I'll just say we're going to connect this. So I'll just try this and I'll click on learn. So I just hit a note on message and I'll just say I want this message to control my transport. We'll choose device and I want it to be, start. So now when I hit that note, if I had it set up right, that could just do your generic remote, to do that particular flag. So that's how you could set up a generic remote. So, you could use any MIDI key to do it for you. So, play around with the generic remote and make that work. Some keyboards and some controllers will do transport via Mackie control, and you could also configure that in a very similar way. So if you come here to your studio setup, you can add a Mackie control and then set the right ports for that. Okay, so just probably a further comment on the hissing sound. It says when I'm working in Cubase, I cannot listen to it, but after exporting, all that hissing sound appears. Make sure that you're, sometimes people, one thing that people I've seen run into is like they have their mix console set up on their project and they treat this as kind of their volume for their master fader. So I see some people, have this either turned way up too high or way up too low. So, it's a common question I'll get, a couple times a month. It's like, yeah, my mix down's really, sounds weak. Why is that? And it's like, okay, where's your master fader at? And they're, minus 40 dB. And then, at that point, you're telling Cubase to, when you export the file to, export it down minus 40 dB. So when you're doing your export audio mix down, make sure, check out where your master fader volume is actually set to. And I think that would probably, be, that could lead you to the solution. Okay, so we have a question. How can I fix the missing file, please? So if you get a message, I think I may have a project. So if you get a message like when you open up a project that there's a file missing, one of the things you could do is, locate the file. But if it's a file that's missing that's being referenced, you could have the pool window. And the pool window may have files that, aren't in the project but are still referenced in the pool. And the pool is looking for these audio files because they're a part of it. So if you have a file that's getting an annoying, this file is missing message, but, the project is playing back just fine, just right click and choose to remove unused files and save the project again. And that file error message should go away. Okay. Moving on. Thanks again for all the questions. We'll be wrapping up pretty soon. My son's being very patient. Okay, so I see a question. Can you give away Cubase Pro to me, please? I wish I could. So, but, you could try the trial version. And, if you're looking for like Cubase elements, there is a stay home collection you could do. Okay. Okay, so I just see a question. Hi there. I have one question for Mac users. How do I optimize Cubase settings for optimal multi-core usage? One of the things that you could work with, especially if you're doing a lot of virtual instruments, is just how, spreading multiple instruments, like having more instances of instruments with fewer instruments in them and kind of spreading out plugins. And that helps, on Mac or PC to kind of spread the processing across different chords or different processing cores. All right. So good to see Vinny from Orlando. Thanks for saying hi. Okay. So I see a question. Hi, Greg. Looking for a pro set of cans from Yamaha. Do they have any? Yeah, Yamaha has a bunch of great headphones. I think I'm using some right now. Let me just check, see if there are the model numbers on it. I don't see the model number, but I think I have like the $200 Yamaha headphones, and I've found them that, I could wear them for, 5 or 6 hours at a time without it feeling like I'm wearing headphones, and find that they work really well. And I know people that have bought them have, really, been very complimentary and very surprised at kind of the quality of the Yamaha headphones. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to draw in automation on multiple tracks at the same time, or how to copy and paste the same information across multiple tracks? Would be handy for orchestral expressions. So if we have, automation, and this is one area where you may see the automation, the MIDI CCs as automation here. Make sense. So let's say if I just want to look at my automation lanes for a couple of different tracks. I could select, let's say I move my cursor here and I just want to grab my range selection tool. So, just copy, paste, 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 and then I could just enable the automation there. So just copying and pasting, just like any other part. And if you want to like show, let's say if you get to the point where it's like, oh, great, I don't want to open up like 10 tracks and find their volume automations. What you could do is just, I could say, let's hide all my automations, and I could just say from the automation panel, and that's F6, just show volume automation for all tracks. So I could hide them all, or show pan automation, volume automation, so you those are some filters to find particular automations. Okay. Okay, so you see, hi Greg. Last week I saw in Dorco the function condensed score. Is there something like in Cubase Pro 10.5 or maybe the future? Because they are both Steinberg products. I don't think, I'm not sure if we'll see that coming to Cubase, and that's a pretty incredible Dorco feature. And what a condensed score does is, if you have, four trumpets, four different trumpet parts for the conductor score to be able to do condensing so that they could show up as one or two parts where musically sensible. It's kind of, voodoo science of what they're doing with that. So I think that's going to be kind of a unique thing to Dorco for a while. I wouldn't anticipate it coming into Cubase, even though it is the same company. It's kind of different development teams. So, all right. Okay, just Okay, just reading through some comments. We'll wrap up here soon. Okay. All right. Just had it jump way ahead. All right. Let me just see if we get another couple. All right. Now I realize how many questions or where we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. All right, I guess with that, we'll go ahead and gone 3 hours and 29 minutes. I had a great time in a hangout. I want to thank everyone for wonderful questions. If you have questions that you want to send in advance, please send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. It gets forwarded to my work email, and sometimes the actual email of who sent it isn't included. So if you include your email, so often I could just reply directly to you if it's something simple. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. I hope everyone's learned something. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please feel free to subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up and let your friends know that we're doing these hangouts. This will be available to stream offline as well. So we'll try to have it indexed later tonight. We want everyone to stay safe and healthy and make some great music at home. And we'll be doing this for the foreseeable future on Tuesday and Fridays. So, please come back on Tuesday, come back on Friday. We start at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And if you have questions, please send them in advance. And I want everyone to have a great weekend. Please stay safe and healthy, and we'll all get through the crisis. But, while we're doing this, let's make some wonderful music and do some great audio. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys on the next Hangout. Have a great weekend. Bye.